This is our first talk in a while here in Southern California. I guess the last talk we did was about 6 months ago. Maybe it was 9 months ago here in San Diego. Hopefully this will be the first among several talks in the Southern California area. Tonight I think we have a real treat. We have, I think, one of the world's most prominent, most important, and most passionate defenders of capitalism. I think one of the most successful CEOs in modern American history. Mr. Allison is the retired chairman and CEO of BB&T Corporation, the 10th largest financial services holding company, headquartered in the United States. During Mr. Allison's tenure as CEO from 1985 to 2008, BB&T grew from $4.5 billion to $152 billion in assets. In March 2005, he joined the faculty of Wake Forest University School of Business as Distinguished Professor of Finance. 2009, practice. He was recognized by the Harvard Business Review as one of the top 100 most successful CEOs in the world over the last decade. Dr. Allison is going to talk to us today about using Ayn Rand's values to be successful in business. We are live streaming this on the web, and we are videotaping this, so this will be up on the web hopefully in the next few weeks. With that, I'd like to welcome Mr. John Allison.
Thanks, Ron. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy the opportunity to talk to objectivist audiences, which is not my normal experience. I normally am talking to students and faculty members on college campuses who have a different worldview oftentimes. My purpose today is to really talk about objectivism as a real-world competitive advantage. And the reason I think that's important, and when I talk to a lot of objectivists, I think many objectivists view the philosophy as a little bit of a burden because it's out of sync with what's happening today in today's world, but I think it's a huge competitive advantage. And the presentation I'm going to make to you is one I normally title Principled Leadership. I use it on college campuses, and I've used these basic ideas at BB&T that I think are the foundation for our organizational success. The reason I talk about it in terms of leadership, because I think that we as individuals have to lead ourselves. And most failures of leadership are failures of self-leadership. And leadership matters. Organizations depend on quality of leadership, and individuals have to have the right set of principles to be successful in leading themselves. Leadership is actually a very complex subject, but I think it has two fundamental components. First, I believe it's critical that as individuals we have a sense of purpose and we can inspire a sense of purpose in others. And secondly, we have to have the right kind of principles to turn those purposes into reality. And this presentation is really what I'd call a common sense interpretation of the fundamentals of objectivism in terms of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, and applying that to living your own life on a personally successful basis. The organizing principle of human action is purpose. As human beings, we're purpose-directed entities. We have to know where we're going in order to get there. Organization, businesses, civic organizations are simply groups of human beings. For organization to be successful, the people in those organizations must vest in the purpose of the organization. As a concrete example, BB&T is very much a purpose-driven business. And our purpose is expressed in our mission. Our mission is to literally make the world a better place to live. By helping our clients achieve economic success, financial security, by creating a place where our employees can learn, grow, and be fulfilled in their work, making the community's work better place to be, and thereby optimizing the long-term return to our shareholder while creating a safe and sound investment. We're not confused. In a free market, our primary fiduciary obligation is to our shareholders. We know that. We work for our shareholders. However, that is an end, not a means. The means to the end is to first do a great job for our clients because all our revenues come from our clients. To do a great job for our clients, we've got to have great people because we're fundamentally in a people business. We've got to create the kind of environment where people want to work for BB&T. We do all that within the context of our communities, not from an altruistic perspective, but if our communities don't do well, we won't do well. So we try to run our business in a very long perspective the right things for clients, employees, and communities, and in that context create superior rewards for shareholders. Just like organizations need a sense of purpose, so do you. In fact, one of the things I find most discouraging is to talk to people about their work, and they will often describe their work as some kind of burden. You know, I have to go to work. And if you think about all the time, all the effort, all the energy you spend at work, if your work is just a burden, wow, are you missing a lot of what life is about. In order to have meaning, in order to have passion in your life, you have to have a sense of purpose in your work because you spend so much time, so much effort, so much energy at work. The content of work will vary a lot. There will be many kinds of purposes, but I would argue the context is the same for every person in this room and for the vast majority of human beings. And the context has two components. First, I believe that every person in this room wants to make the world a better place to live. I don't think you'd be here tonight if you didn't want to make the world a better place to live. In fact, I think that's a characteristic of almost everybody. Not everybody, but almost everybody. Now, the interesting thing is you don't have to go to Africa and feed hungry children to make the world a better place to live. There are a lot of ways to make the world a better place to live. Businesses make the world a better place to live. We provide better products, better services that improve the quality of life. In fact, the primary difference between the quality of life in Africa and the quality of life in the United States is we have better businesses. When business leaders forget they're in business to make the world a better place to live, bad things happen to their business. Approached properly, business is very noble work. Good doctors, good teachers, good homemakers make the world a better place to live. There are lots of ways to make the world a better place to live. The second component of purpose, however, is equally important and far under-discussed. I think this is something we do a terrible job in communicating to our children. You need to make the world a better place to live doing something you want to do for you. You have a fundamental right to your own life. If you were trying to make the world a better place to live, and even if you were successful in that regard, but you didn't enjoy doing it, you will have wasted the most precious thing you have, which is you. And if you try to make the world a better place to live doing something you don't want to do, the odds are you won't do it very well. So you need to make the world a better place to live doing something you want to do for you. The means by which we accomplish our purpose is a set of principles by which we live our lives. At some level, many people realize that ethics matter, that values matter, and yet there are endless ethical deviations in our society, in business and in politics almost every day. And very few people use ethics very effectively. And that's because most people have a kind of random set of values that they developed in a hodgepodge fashion, and they do one thing and they feel guilty because they didn't do something else. And very few people have really stepped back and thought about what is the purpose of ethics. The perfect purpose of values is to provide us with principles that if we live the principles, we improve the probability of staying alive, being successful, and ultimately being happy. So values are really about principles that lead to success and happiness. Even having the right values doesn't guarantee success and happiness because things happen in Mother Nature beyond our control, but they improve the odds. And if you think about your values in that context, they're not arbitrary, they're not capricious, they don't fall out of the sky, they're not necessarily what your mom, dad, Sunday school teacher, kindergarten teacher told you when you were 5 years old. In fact, defining your values is a scientific problem. And here's the question. Given the laws of nature, Mother Nature, and given human nature, what principles are most likely to lead to your survival, your success, and ultimately your happiness? We have 10 core values at BB&T, and these are my personal values, and you'll see that they're really derivatives from the metaphysics, epistemology, and the ethics of objectivism. As we go through these values, you'll note that not only are they non-contradictory, they're integrated. Fail on one of these values and fail on all the others. Our first value is reality. What is, is. A baby's born at the hospital here in San Diego today, and that baby opens her eyes, and guess what? Mom's here, Dad's here, the doctor's here, the nurses are here, we're here. That baby doesn't get to make it up. In fact, that baby's task in life is to figure out how to stay alive, be successful, and be happy given the facts of reality. At some point, you were that baby. You were born into this world, and you've been trying to figure out how to stay alive, be successful, be happy given the facts of reality. At one level, everybody, I think, knows that, but at another level, the vast majority of people are in great resistance to reality, which is an unhealthy place to be. Interestingly enough, people make three basic mistakes in regard to reality. These mistakes have a profound impact on the quality of individual lives and the quality of life on the planet. These are actually epistemological errors, or errors in thinking, but they relate to reality. The first error we use a metaphor for, wishing something is so does not make it so. It's a metaphor for the ultimate psychological sin, which is the act of evasion. Evasion occurs when you're presented with some information that at some level you know needs to be examined. But you refuse to examine it because it threatens something you want to believe about yourself or you want to believe about the world, so you literally don't hear it. And when you evade, you're detached from reality and bad things happen. I started my career as a small business, a farm lender. And a simple observation, number one reason small businesses fail, the leader of that business evades. Things are going along fine in the business, something happens in the economy, something happens at home. He doesn't want to hear about it, runs the business right into the ground. More dramatic story, Citigroup, largest financial institution in the world, hires a group of geniuses to create their subprime lending business, affordable housing business, maybe even a legitimate business when they started it. However, long before any of us heard anything about subprime lending, I'm guaranteeing this group of geniuses, these PhDs out of Harvard and MIT, in the back room of Citigroup, knew something was going wrong in that business. But what did they do? They evaded. Why did they evade? Because they were going to get paid less, and their company was going to make less money, so they ran Citigroup right into the ground. Unfortunately, everybody evades. You evade. Your family, your friends have been telling you about your evasions for a long period of time. The next time you hear something that you've heard before that you know you ought to examine, have the courage to examine it. Because being detached from reality is an unhealthy place to be. In my business experience over 40 years, the single biggest reason that people get in trouble is acts of evasion. The second error is the belief in popularity. Reality is independent of popularity. In the year 1600, 99.9% of the people on the planet were certain that the sun went around the earth. Get up in the morning, sun comes up in the east, goes down the west, the sun goes around the earth. 1620, Galileo proves that the earth goes around the sun. The fact that 99% of the people thought the sun went around the earth had no effect on the sun or the earth. Reality is independent of popularity. More recent example, and this is an interesting example, in the subprime lending business, I think I understand how a big company like Citigroup got into that business. But lots of banks, BB&T size, got into the business and experienced some very serious problems for that reason. And I had the opportunity to talk to a number of the CEOs of those banks that I had known for a while, and I asked them, why'd you get in the subprime lending business? And they had some interesting answers, but in essence, their answer in almost every case was, well, everybody else was doing it. Everybody else was doing it. There's a number of studies out recently. I'm teaching in a university environment. The number one reason that students cheat is because other students cheat. Reality is independent of popularity. Probably everybody in here has been in some kind of decision-making environment where you really didn't feel comfortable with the group decision, but you went along with it anyway because who were you to stand up against the crowd? One thing about entrepreneurs, they always go against the crowd. They always figure out things that other people don't see. They think for themselves. The third error is a belief in authority, and this is, I think, the most unnecessary error. Reality is independent of authority. 1620, Galileo publishes his book, proves that the earth goes around the sun. The Pope, who is the intellectual, spiritual leader of Western civilization, highly educated, very intelligent man, doesn't like Galileo's book. It threatens his most fundamental belief, so he promptly puts Galileo under house arrest, tries to destroy every copy of Galileo's book. A few books sneak out, lead to Newton, lead to the Industrial Revolution, the quality of life we have today. Guess what? Whether the Pope liked it or not, the earth kept going around the sun. Reality is independent of authority. More recent, more dramatic example, and I personally got to look at this case, the big authorities in the financial services industries are Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch. They rate financial instruments. They have a special oligopoly that the government has given them, so they're supposed to know what they're doing. They did a really bad job of rating financial instruments. They rated a lot of financial instruments that were as AAA that were F. They missed by a mile and misled lots of investors, caused trillions of dollars of destruction of wealth throughout the world. You can be pretty unhappy with Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, and they did a really bad job. On the other hand, interestingly enough, that was an avoidable error. One reason that BB&T has done a lot better than most large financial institutions is we didn't make that mistake. And the reason we didn't make that mistake, some of us had been in the banking business a long time, and we remember 1990 when we had another real estate correction, and we realized what the loan losses were in 1990. So we actually looked at these instruments that Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch were rating AAA and said, wow, their assumptions about loan losses are extremely optimistic. If it's just as bad as 1990, the losses are going to be a lot worse than they projected. So we chose not to buy those instruments. We do have to rely on authorities, but we were responsible for evaluating our authorities. And just because an authority says it so does not make it so. One of the most interesting aspects of reality is the law of cause and effect, or the law of causality. If you want to visualize the law of cause and effect, you can see one billiard ball hitting another billiard ball. You can see the first billiard ball cause the second billiard ball to move. But the law of causality is actually much deeper than that. What the law of causality says is that everything in nature has a nature, and everything must act consistent with this nature. Billiard balls have to act like billiard balls. Elephants have to act like elephants. And as a human being, we have a nature. And we must act consistent with our nature. However, we're not billiard balls. We're not deterministic. One of the most fundamental aspects of our nature is we have free will. We have to make choices. We have to make choices. And the self-evidency of free will is a set of choices that you've been making since you were very young, that you literally make every few seconds, and that only you can make. And that's a choice to focus your mind or not, to be here or not. During this presentation, some of you will be here all the time. Some of you will not. You will choose, however, when you are in focus, because nobody can stay in focus at all times. During a presentation like this, you should be in focus. Maybe on Friday nights you get to go out of focus. One of the interesting things that happens, one way we evade is we go out of focus. And that's not a healthy place to be. But you do choose where you focus your mind or not. The other unique aspect of human nature is we have the capacity to think, the ability to reason. Everything that's alive has some method of staying alive. A lion has claws to hunt with, a deer has speed to avoid the hunter, and we have the capacity to think. And our capacity to think is literally our only means of survival, success, and happiness. There are no shortcuts, there are no free lunches. We're very fortunate, in my opinion. The great genius of history taught us how to think. He did that back in 300 BC. And he said we ought to begin with premises based on the facts. We ought to use induction and deduction to derive conclusions. We ought to integrate those conclusions without contradiction. Fundamental rule of logic is to avoid contradiction. And then that conclusion can become a premise for a higher level of thinking. It's interesting to reflect on the fact that despite knowing how to think for a long period of time, a lot of times we don't think this way, right? We think in a very muddled fashion. And when you violate your means of survival, success, and happiness, you're not going to have a great outcome. In addition, it's interesting how we try to improve our thinking process. And I see this a lot because I teach in a graduate business school, and I think that's a very healthy thing to do. But people like to focus on the higher level thinking, which is certainly an enjoyable experience. However, the real driver in thinking is premises. If you have an error in your premise, you will of necessity have an error in your conclusion. If you build a 20-story building on quicksand, it's going to fall over. In fact, the next time you're having an argument with somebody, I guarantee you won't be arguing about what you think you're arguing about. You're really arguing about premises which typically both of you don't hold consciously. And those premises are driving your conclusions. It's interesting to reflect on where you get your most important premises, your most fundamental beliefs that have a profound impact on the quality of your life. Most of your most fundamental beliefs come from your moms, dads, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when you were very young. And where did they get their fundamental beliefs from? Their moms, dads, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when they were very young. Where did they get their beliefs from? Their moms, dads, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when they were very young. A couple thoughts about those fundamental beliefs. First, they're primitive. And secondly, you probably have a hodgepodge. Some beliefs that make sense and some beliefs that don't make sense. The most powerful way that you can improve your thinking process is to have courage to look at your fundamental beliefs. Reject all beliefs which are inconsistent with reality, they can't be, and reject all contradictions, because contradictions cannot exist in reality. Induction and deduction. Deduction is where we go from the general to the specific. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Deduction is a concrete application of a general principle. We're fortunate that Aristotle pretty much outlined the rules for deduction, and groups like this deduce very well. You probably wouldn't be here. I see that in universities. We can test for deduction. Very powerful, very useful tool, but as useful as deduction is, far, far more important is induction. Induction is where we go from the concrete things in the real world to the general principle. How did we decide that all men were mortal? Where did that come from? Induction is really what makes human beings human. The basic expression of induction is called concept formation. Concept formation is something that all human beings can do. Some can do it a lot better than others. When you were very young, you could look at chairs and see that they were like each other and different other things. You developed a word, a concept called chair, and your parents got very excited because they realized that was the beginning of the thinking process. And when you have children, you'll feel the same way. And then you were able to look at tables and see they were like each other and different other things. You developed a word, concept called table, and then you made a giant intellectual leap. You looked at tables and chairs that don't look like each other at all. You grasped they have a common purpose, and you developed a word, a concept called furniture, and you did that all the way up to the most complex ideas, how the world ought to be run, truth, beauty, very complex concepts. Several thoughts about concept formation. First, it is what makes the human mind so powerful. Think about something as simple as chairs. In the real world, there are literally billions of chairs. And if you had to think of them one at a time, perceptually like an animal, that's all you could think about, and those billions of chairs wouldn't exist. In one word, one concept, you've grasped billions of things in the real world. Concept formation is what makes the human mind so powerful. Second aspect of concept formation, this actually deals with two kind of philosophically important ideas. You've always probably heard that you should keep an open mind. And oftentimes, particularly in university settings, the corollary to that is therefore you need to be very skeptical because there is no certainty. Here's the interesting thing. You should keep an open mind and you can yet be certain at the same time. Take something, again, as simple as chairs. You know a lot more about chairs than you did when you were 5 years old. But if you did it right at 5 years old, what you knew is right. You just learned more. So you should have an open mind. You can learn more about anything, but that doesn't mean you have to be skeptical. You can still be certain at the same time. Final thought about concept formation. Concepts are hierarchical. You start with tables and chairs, and you move up to furniture, and you eventually get to who you ought to vote for president, what philosophical ideas you ought to act on, what's truth, what's beauty. Very complex ideas. Give you the good news and the bad news. The good news is you probably did a great job on tables and chairs. The bad news is odds are very high that you took your most complicated concepts from authorities. Who got them from authorities? Even your most complicated ideas, your most complex ideas should be traceable back to reality. And if they aren't valid. One question I get when I talk about concept formation is, when I talk about concept formation when I'm typically talking to business groups, and I did this with the BB&T employees. And the answer to that is interesting to me. We are in a new world. We're in a new world where we're in competition with 7 billion people on this planet. And those people are far closer to us through technology, are far better educated than they used to be, and are willing to work a lot harder than us for a lot less. If you're going to be successful in that world, you really need to be a master of your field of endeavor. You need to be really good at what you do. And if you look at people that have achieved mastery, what they have done is develop concepts that enable them to make better decisions. Concepts that enable them to understand more complex issues and integrate those issues together. Probably everybody in here has been to a doctor that wasn't so good, and you've probably been to a good doctor. And a good doctor can take your symptoms, integrate that, and give you a suggestion for the proper cure for your health issue. I know in a university you see some really good teachers and some not so good teachers. And if you look at the really good teachers, not only have they mastered the material, they've mastered the ability to communicate that material. In my business, in the banking business, we're some master lenders. And they can take very complex financial information, integrate it together, and make very high-quality decisions with very low error rates. And the way they've done that, they've developed concepts that enable them to make those decisions more effectively. How do you do that? The first thing is to realize that's what you're doing, that your purpose is to integrate things together that are alike to enable you to come up with better decision making. And secondly, I don't know how much you can impact your IQ. And when I talk to BB&T employees, I say when I'm talking about thinking, this is not about IQ. But there is a commitment that you can make. You can choose to have a disciplined mind. And you can commit yourself to being a lifelong learner, and in that context, to have a very active mind. The people that are lifelong learners, that have active minds, they tend to read more, they take more advantage of educational experiences, but they're particularly effective at learning from life experiences. And as human beings, we're primarily life experience learners. And I think that's a great objectivist lesson, by the way. It's the inductions from life that really enable us to think more effectively. And if you look at people that are superior experiential learners, they do two simple but profound things particularly well. First, probably everybody in here can associate with learning from mistakes. You probably made mistakes that have changed your life. However, unfortunately, a lot of times we don't learn from our mistakes. We get to do them over and over again. In fact, we often embed mistakes into our personality. Say, ooh, I've done that before, I've done that before. Why don't we always learn from our mistakes? Because in order to learn from a mistake, we not only have to admit that we made a mistake, but we have to admit the deepest psychological cause. And unfortunately, sometimes we're guilty of that ultimate psychological sin of evasion. And when we evade, we can't learn. The second thing that superior experiential learners do is recognize that life is a learning experience if you live your life in focus. When I was CEO of BB&T, we had 33 community banks, and I would go visit those community banks, and we had luncheons with our local advisory board members who were business and community leaders. And I never had a boring luncheon. And the reason for that is they were always asking questions. They always wanted to know what was going on, and I was also always asking them questions. You could understand why they had been successful. They had very active minds, and they were in focus. Unfortunately, a lot of people live their lives out of focus, and when you're out of focus, you can't learn, you can't grow. Some successful business people have superior IQs. I think that's atypical. When I see in most successful business people that distinguishes them is they evade less and they stay in focus more, and that's a huge competitive advantage in life. Our third value is independent thinking. Independent thinking means thinking for yourselves from the facts of reality. We learn a lot from each other. Teamwork's very important. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but we think alone. We think alone. Our minds are not physically connected. Independent thinking is important because it makes two things both necessary and possible: responsibility and creativity. The most important meta-psychological decision you can make is to choose to be responsible for yourself. A lot of people view themselves as victims, and if you're a victim, you give all of your power away because somebody else has to change for you to be happy, and you can't change anybody else. People view themselves as victims because of their race or sex or nationality. Most common reason that people view themselves as victims is because of their mother. If I just had a different mother, I'd be a lot better person, right? It is true that bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people. Mother Nature just is. But we're responsible for doing the best we can with what happens to us. Interesting observation, something that everybody in this room knows, but a lot of people don't want to admit, is that at least at the level of consciousness, we are all alone. Sorry, that's just the way it is. Therefore, only you can be responsible for you. It is not possible for anybody else to be responsible for you. The flip of that's also true. You cannot be responsible for anybody else. Classic parental error, classic managerial error. You cannot be responsible for your children. If you try to be responsible for your children, you'll set them up to fail. You are responsible to do your absolute best to teach your children to be responsible for themselves. As a manager, you cannot be responsible for your employees. You see this often in young managers. You cannot be responsible for your employees. If you try to be responsible for your employees, you'll set them and you up to fail. You are responsible to do your absolute best to teach your employees to be responsible for themselves. And if somebody refuses to learn to be responsible, get you a new employee. Interesting observation. Successful people like are in this room choose to be responsible for their success. Wherever I find many successful people choose not to be responsible for their own happiness. And only you can make you happy. Creativity. All human progress, by definition, is based on creativity. Because unless somebody does something better, which will be different, there can be no progress. Creativity is only possible to an independent thinker, somebody that thinks like the crowd, cannot be innovative, cannot be creative, cannot contribute to human progress. The need for creativity is why entrepreneurs are so important to economic well-being. It's why socialism is doomed to failure, given man's nature, because socialism destroys innovation, destroys creativity. Creativity is essential for human well-being. There are an interesting set of obstacles to creativity. The number one obstacle, I believe, is that many people think of creativity as some kind of magical or mystical event. It just kind of happens. Not so. Creativity is an intellectual process like any other thinking process. It is true that most creativity takes place in the subconscious, but the vast majority of your thinking takes place in the subconscious. A reasonable analogy is you're a computer programmer. You've been writing computer programs since you were very young. You push those programs down into your subconscious, and you've been running on those programs. And most of your thinking takes place in the subconscious. But you wrote the programs, and you can change the programs. Creativity is one of those processes. It is an intellectual process. If you study people that are creative, they have two interesting attributes. One, they believe that being creative is important. And second, they believe that they can be creative. Fourth value is productivity. Productivity exists on two planes. At the macro level, in a free market, profit is a good thing. Never apologize for your company being very profitable. Profit is simply the difference between the value of what we create and the cost of creating it. The bigger the difference, the better. To be highly profitable, an organization must be very productive. It must be very efficient. At the individual level, productivity is a gut-level commitment to get the job done, to get it done on time, to get it done in an effective and efficient manner. Fundamental psychological difference between non-performers and high performers. I've seen this many times over the years. I'll go visit one of our branches, and branch won't be doing well, and I'll have a conversation with the branch manager, and I'll always get a story. And the story looks like something like this. You know, those competitors across the street are not charging high enough rates on their loans, or paying too high rates on the certificates of deposit. That stoplight keeps people from getting into this branch, and if those idiots in the home office would ever fix the computer, everything would be great. Sometimes there's truth to those stories. Sometimes there are obstacles you can't overcome. Sometimes we change branch managers and everything gets to be okay. I contrast that with our highest performing employees. We have a Sterling Award performance level, and we're 5,000 or 6,000 employees that participate in this program. We've had it for about 15 years. There are only 4 people that have won the award every 15 years. And yet the same 25% win the award. People will win it 1 year, they'll come back 3 years later. And if you talk to those high performers, they'll not only tell you what they did, they'll tell you how much more they're going to do in the future. They don't always succeed. They fail plenty of times, but they keep coming back. They keep coming back. They have a gut-level focus on the goal. They face the same obstacles, but they're focused on the end result. Non-performers look for the reasons to fail. They look for obstacles to become excuses for failure. High performers fail, but they come back and they have that gut-level commitment to get the job done. Honesty is a foundational value. If you think about most of the ethical deviations in our society, they're some way or the other related to dishonesty. And of course, being dishonest is being detached from reality, which is an unhealthy place to be. It is interesting and I think important to reflect on the standard for honesty, because a lot of times people think about honesty as about being right. Because we are not omniscient, you can be honest and be wrong. It's not necessarily about being right. But there is a rigorous standard for honesty. We must mean what we say and know what we mean. We must mean what we say and know what we mean. Mean what we say means we don't intentionally mislead people. But it's more rigorous than that, and I think this is actually very important. I don't think anybody in here probably goes around deceiving people at the meta level. I don't even find that with college students. And if you do, you'll get caught and you'll get in trouble. But we do sometimes tell white lies. And the cumulative effect of white lies can become a black lie. In fact, it happens pretty often. You see that in management situations. You'll talk to Tom about Susie, and Tom's unhappy with Susie's performance. And he gives you all these things that are wrong with Susie. And then Tom does Susie's evaluation, and he doesn't tell her the really bad stuff. And then he gets mad at Susie because she didn't hear what he didn't say, right? You see that in spousal relationships, right? You see that in friendships where we don't tell each other the real truth, and it hurts, and even in some cases destroys a relationship. It's interesting to reflect on that. If you don't tell the real truth, how can the other person change? And secondly, and I think a lot of times the reason we don't tell the real truth is we don't know that what we say is really true. We don't have enough confidence that we hold this belief that we're not confident enough to express out. And therefore we hold a negative belief without really being willing to reflect it. and that's very destructive. Say what you mean, say what you mean. The cumulative effect of white lies is often a black lie, particularly in business situations, but also in personal relationships. And know what we mean. Standard is not omniscience, but know what it means we don't claim knowledge we don't have. I see this in business settings. Often there'll be a group sitting around, and one person will act like they know what they're talking about, and that will lead the group in one direction, and then that person will become more vested in what they're saying, even though in reality they don't know what they're talking about. Know what we mean? It means that you don't claim knowledge you don't have, and if you don't know it, you don't know it. And claiming knowledge you don't have is a form of dishonesty. The fundamental expression of honesty in the world is that we keep our agreements. BB&T did 150 acquisitions in my career, and unfortunately I made some pretty dumb agreements. But we always kept those agreements because then we could look back to our next acquisition partner and say, talk to the 150 people we've acquired before, and they'll tell you we always kept our agreements. Honesty requires that you keep your agreements. Don't make agreements you can't keep. Sixth value is integrity. There are a lot of apparent temptations in life. I'm in the money business. There are lots of temptations in the money business. However, what you can know with certainty, if you develop your principles logically based on the facts, those temptations aren't really temptations. They're just ways to fail. Integrity is really the harmony of mind and body. It says if you believe something, do it. Unfortunately, the vast majority of people don't act with integrity, and for two reasons. First, they have values that you cannot live in the real world. So if you hold a value that's not going to work in the real world, in order to stay alive, you will violate that value. But more important and more common, let's put it this way, is most people have conflicting values. They have beliefs that are inconsistent with one another, and you cannot act with inconsistent beliefs. Whether you agree with anything I have to say tonight, and when I'm particularly important when I'm talking to non-objectivist audiences, it is very important that you have a consistent, integrated value system, because you cannot act with integrity if you hold contradictions. If you think about integrity in that regard, integrity is not a duty. It is really a means to success and happiness. And here's the role of integrity. You develop these principles outside the heat of value. You know a battle, and you know these principles will lead to your success and the happiness in the long term, so you don't have to review the principles in the decision process. You know they're the foundations for your long-term success and happiness. There is one challenge in regards to integrity, and I think this is particularly important in our society today. Integrity does require a long-term perspective. There are many things that appear to be better in the short term that are very destructive in the long term. And you need to hold the context that you're likely to live 80, 85, 90, whatever, 100 years in today's world, and live your life accordingly with values that will promote your long-term success and your long-term happiness. There are lots of compromises in the content of life. Never compromise the context. Never compromise your principles, because your principles are the foundation for your success and your happiness. Justice or fairness in individual human relationships, justice is the number one value. If you ask somebody what they think about their manager, pretty soon they're going to say, well, I think my manager's just, fair or not. People don't want to work for somebody that under-rewards performance. And interestingly enough, they don't want to work for somebody that over-rewards performance. And they're right to feel that way. In addition, if there's no reward for superior performance, the best people will leave and we'll be worse off. But equally important, if there's no reward for superior performance, the average person won't be motivated to do better. And a lot of leadership and management is about getting average people to perform at above average level. At BB&T, we strongly believe that those that contribute the most should receive the most. We have incentive systems that go deep into the organization. Measuring performance is part art, part science, but the goal is clear. We want those that contribute the most to receive the most. Because we believe in justice, we consciously reject egalitarianism. In fact, I think egalitarianism is one of the most destructive ideas in our society today. Egalitarians don't want equal opportunity. They want equal outcome. It is true that everybody should be equal before the law, and it's true that every human being ought to be treated with dignity and respect because they're a human being. But it is not true that everybody is equal. In fact, I've never met two equal people. Every person in this room is a unique, special individual. We're all unique, special individuals. That's the good news. We're all different. We're all different. At the extreme, Thomas Edison and the Boston Strangler are not equal. They're not equal. Because people are not equal, we do have to judge people. We have to judge a lot of things. Are we wearing the right clothes? Did we buy the right car? Do we have the right people working for us? Are we working for the right people? Do we have the right kind of friends? Are we marrying the right spouse? Do our children have the right kind of friends? In fact, leadership and management, one of the most important things you have to do is you do have to judge other people. That is a lot of what leadership and management is about, because people aren't equal. People are different. Because judging people is very important, it's very important that we do it right. And there's a proper context for evaluating, for judging other people. We have to judge people as individuals based on their personal merits, based on what matters in that circumstance. So we do have to judge people as individuals based on their personal merits, based on what matters in that circumstance. For that reason, we consciously reject collectivism in all its ugly variations. Collectivists judge people by their memberships in groups. Forms of collectivism include racism, sexism, communism, socialism, nationalism are all forms of collectivism. What's interesting about collectivists is they're always wrong, right? Because everybody in the group is different. They have a 100% error rate. In business, the most common forms of collectivism are racism and sexism. We made some progress, but there's still plenty of racists and sexists around. It's interesting to reflect on what motivates a racist or sexist. I think it's primarily low self-esteem. You know, I'm not too good, but my group's better than your group. In addition, racists and sexists don't reflect on what is the implication of being a racist or sexist for them. What does that mean? Give you an example. We have a branch manager, and that branch manager doesn't hire the best person to do the job because that person is black, white, male, female, Chinese, any other non-essential reason. What's going to happen? That branch is going to be a lot successful than it would have been. If she continues that pattern, eventually the branch will be so unsuccessful that she'll get fired, which is a form of justice. So being a racist or a sexist is bad for the person being discriminated against, but it's bad for the person doing the discrimination. And that goes to a very general principle. Our means of survival, success, and happiness is to think rationally. One of the most important arenas in which we must think rationally is our evaluation of other people. When we judge other people for the wrong reasons, bad things happen to us. Now, there's been enough discussion of racism and sexism, at least at a conscious level. Most people may realize that, but it's a lot more subtle than that. When you judge people because of their clothes or their hairstyle, bad things can happen to you. Something I talk about with university campuses. If you pick your future spouse based on how good they look instead of their character, the odds are bad things will happen to you. In a couple other thoughts about justice. Justice is a two-edged sword. We should reward superior performance. That's justice, right? Most business people get that, by the way. In society, we don't get it, right? But people that contribute the most should receive the most. The other edge of the sword, however, is harder, I think, for a lot of business people. We have to deal with non-performers. Failing to deal with non-performers is an injustice. Why is that? Of course, failing to deal with non-performance is not fair to the team because the non-performers hurt the team, but it's also not fair to the non-performers. I've never met a happy non-performer. Failing to deal with non-performance is an injustice. Something I say to college students, if your professor gives you a better grade than you've earned, they've actually done an injustice because you think you know something and you don't really know it. Final thought about justice. Justice only applies to human action. Mother Nature is neither just nor unjust. Mother Nature just is. And a lot of people spend a lot of time and waste energy cursing Mother Nature. Mother Nature just is. Eighth value is pride. Aristotle said pride was the greatest of all virtues because to have it, you had to have all the others. You had to be just, honest, have integrity, be a rational, independent thinker. As such, pride serves two very important roles. It's a psychological reminder to do good and a psychological reward for having done good. I want to ask you to ask yourself a very important question. The next time you're faced with an ethical decision, which is more often than you like, ask yourself this question. Would you be willing to tell the people that you care about, that you've judged valuable in your life, not the newspapers, but the people you care about, what you're going to do and why you're going to do it? If you wouldn't tell the people you care about what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, don't do it. Because you will always know what you did, and more importantly, you will know why you did it. And you always want to be able to be proud of you. Ninth value is self-esteem and self-motivation. And for groups like this, this is unquestionably the biggest issue that I find. I see at higher levels in organizations, people very seldom fail because they aren't smart enough. They very seldom fail because they aren't well educated enough. When they do fail, it's typically some expression of low self-esteem that turns into self-destructive behavior. Low self-esteem becomes self-destructive behavior. In addition, self-esteem is the foundation for happiness. And happiness is the end of the game, right? And I mean happiness, not having a good time on Friday night, but a life well lived. Hard-earned happiness. Happiness in the Aristotelian sense. When you're 80 years old, you can look back and say, yeah, there were struggles, but I'm glad I took on those tasks. I'm glad I did those hard things. That kind of deep kind of happiness. That's the end of the game, right? Sometimes people in business get confused. They think money's the end of the game. Nothing wrong with money. Money's a really good thing. However, money is not an end. It can be a means to an end. It's not an end. Happiness is the end of the game. And happiness is based on self-esteem. Several thoughts about self-esteem. First, self-esteem is fundamentally self-confidence in your ability to live and be successful given the facts of reality. Therefore, you earn self-esteem by how you live your life. Nobody can give you self-esteem. You cannot give your children self-esteem. Self-esteem has to be earned. Live your life with integrity. Raise your self-esteem. Second thought, and this is the most important, and certainly for most groups, by far the most controversial thought that I have. In order to have a high level of self-esteem, you must believe at a very deep level that you're capable of being good and that you have the moral right to be happy. In order to have a high level of self-esteem, you must believe at a very deep level that you're capable of being good and you have the moral right to be happy. Unfortunately, a very commonly held belief in our society is that as human beings, we're born bad. And the reason we're bad is we're selfish. And selfish is bad, right? I can see Johnny in the sandbox, 3, 4 years old, playing with a truck, having a good time, not bothering anybody. Along comes Fred. Fred would like to have Johnny's truck. Johnny doesn't want to give him a truck. Discussion, debate, argument ensues. Mom, dad, Sunday school teacher, kindergarten teacher gets involved in the argument. Mom says, hey, Johnny, give that truck to Fred. Don't be selfish. Don't be bad. 2 great moral lessons being taught in the sandbox. First, where did Fred get the right to Johnny's truck? You want to know where our social welfare system came from? There it is, embedded in the sandbox, right there. How about the lesson for Johnny, which most of this group got? What was the lesson you got in that sandbox? Don't go for what you want. Your life is secondary. Your life's not as important as other people. And I know a lot of people that are objectivists at this level that aren't at that deeper subconscious level because mom did that when you were 3 or 4 years old, and it's hard to undo that kind of learning. Most of us learned that we shouldn't go for what we want, that other people at some level are more important than we are. Interesting to reflect on selfishness, and let's talk about selfishness objectively. Immutable, non-negotiable fact of reality. Everything that is alive must act in its self-interest or die. Immutable, non-negotiable fact of reality. Everything that is alive must act in its self-interest or die. Lion has to hunt or starve. A deer has to run from the hunter or be eaten. Trees shade out other trees to get sunlight. Amoeba will take chemical that other amoeba would like to have. Life, in fact, is self-sustaining action. Anything that's alive that quits sustaining its life dies. That's how Mother Nature designed the system. To say that man is bad because he's selfish is the same thing as saying the sun's bad because it's hot. Gravity's bad because it holds us down. Sun should be hot. Gravity should hold us down. And as a living entity, we should act in our self-interest. The only option is death. That's how Mother Nature designed the system. It is important that we define acting in our self-interest properly. And I'm going to define it as acting in our rational, long-term self-interest. Because we get a set of false alternatives. And the false alternatives are to take advantage of other people or to self-sacrifice, neither one of which make any sense. In fact, a lot of times when people talk about selfish, what they're talking about is taking advantage of other people. Here's the irony. Taking advantage of other people is not selfish, it's self-destructive. It's self-destructive in 2 ways. First, a very practical way. You see this in business often. You might fool Tom and Fred and Susie, but pretty soon they're going to tell Dick and Harry, and nobody's going to trust you. You probably know people like that. You won't be trusted if you try to take advantage of other people. But there's a deeper cause. if you try to manipulate other people's consciousness, the odds are you're going to do a lot of damage to your own. In my experience, I've met a lot of, quote, successful people. That's in the business I'm in, you meet a lot of those kind of people. Interesting thing, I've never met anybody that's both successful and happy that I think got there taking advantage of other people. I have met some people that had a lot of money that I think got there taking advantage of other people. And they're the most unhappy people I have ever met. It is true that other people's consciousness exists in reality, and you want to influence other people. But when you let go of reality to manipulate other people's consciousness, you do more damage to yourself than you do to them. Taking advantage of other people is not selfish, it's self-destructive. How about self-sacrifice? That's what we're all supposed to do, right? We're supposed to self-sacrifice. That's the moral code of our society. Interesting thing to reflect on. Self-sacrifice, before I do that, let me ask you the most important question I think you can ask yourself. The single most important question that you can ask yourself. Do you have as much right to your life as anybody else does? Do you have as much right to your life as anybody else does? Of course you do. Of course you do. Why would you believe anything different than that? Self-sacrifice carried to the logical extreme is called altruism. Altruism is a philosophically self-defeating concept because it requires that we go to the lowest common denominator. So if I have more money than Tom, I'm obligated to give it to Tom. But even though Tom is poor, if he has more than Susie, he's obligated to give it to Susie. And even though Susie is very poor, if she has more than Barbara, she's obligated to give it to Barbara. And even though Barbara is very, very poor, if she has more than Tracy, she's obligated to give it to Tracy, down to the lowest common denominator. Well, unfortunately, there are always people in the process of dying. And the only way to be equal to somebody that's dying is to die. Now, there are very, very few real altruists in today's world. The good altruists were in the Middle Ages, the monks. They drank dirty dishwater, slept on rocks, beat themselves with whips. Really good altruists. Great way to live, right? Taking advantage of other people and self-sacrifice, neither one makes sense. What we really are is we are traders. We trade value for value. We get better together. In our business, we help our clients achieve economic success and financial security. They let us make a profit doing it. We get better together. In fact, life is about creating win-win relationships. There are only two stable relationship conditions, win-win and lose-lose. Interesting enough, whenever you get greedy and you set up a win-lose, the odds are your partner will get bitter and you'll end up in a lose-lose relationship. You see that in spousal relationships sometimes. In addition, equally interesting, when you get self-sacrificial and you set up a lose-win, you'll get better and you'll end up in a lose-lose relationship. In any meaningful relationship in your life, you should ask, what's in it for me? That is a very fair question. But you should also ask, what's in it for them? Because if there's nothing in it for them, eventually that relationship will not work for you. And of course, it's in your rational self-interest to help the people you care about, that you value because you value them. To help your family, your friends, the people you work with, the people that you value. In fact, if you love your children, helping your children is not a sacrifice. Love is, in fact, the ultimate expression of selfishness. Now, most people don't think that. I use an example with college students to bring that point home. You're getting ready to get married, and your future spouse comes up to you and says, honey, I am so excited about marrying you. This is the biggest self-sacrifice I've ever made. Not exactly what you want to hear, right? I think it's in my rational self-interest to support the United Way. United Way is an umbrella charity organization that does a lot of good in the community. I wouldn't want to live in the kind of community that exists if there were no United Way, and I wouldn't want my children to live in that kind of community. I think it is my rational self-interest to support the United Way. Here's the interesting thing. People say that the problem with the world is people are too selfish. I think the problem with the world is that people aren't selfish, and they don't understand what selfish means. To really be selfish, first you have to hold the context. You have to say, what kind of world would I like to live in, and what would I enjoy doing helping to create that kind of world? What kind of world would I like to live in, and what would I enjoy doing helping to create that kind of world? And that would require that you take care of your mind, that you take care of your body, that you create healthy human relationships. That's a very important part of life, and you do that within the context of a purpose. Just think, if everybody had a clear purpose, if everybody took care of their mind, everybody took care of their body, everybody tried to create healthy human relationships, about 98% of the world's problems would go away. So if people really acted selfishly, the world would be a far better place to live. I had a brother-in-law, drank 30 beers a day, got cirrhosis of the liver, drank 30 beers a day, died. People say he was selfish. I say he was self-destructive. Self-destructive. You should act in your rational self-interest. You have to survive, but it also is your right to enjoy your own life. One of the great philosophical observations from the history of man was expressed by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When most people hear that, they hear liberty, and liberty is very important. But liberty is an old idea. It's a Greek idea. The world-changing idea that Jefferson expressed in the Declaration of Independence was the pursuit of happiness. Before Jefferson, before the thinkers of the Enlightenment, everybody existed for somebody else's good. Good of the king, good of the state, good of the church. Nobody existed for their own good. Jefferson said that each of us has the moral right to the pursuit of our personal happiness. We're not guaranteed success in that pursuit, but we have that right. That is the idea that changed the world, created the most successful society in history and the most benevolent society. When people have the right to their own life, they're naturally nicer to other people. In socialist and communist societies, everybody hates each other because they're all slaves to each other. And I agree with Jefferson. Each of us has a moral right to the pursuit of our personal happiness. If you don't believe at a very deep level you're capable of being good and you have the moral right to be happy, you cannot have a high level of self-esteem. Third thought about self-esteem, just like you need to be judging other people, you ought to be judging yourself. You ought to be asking yourself, am I who I really want to be? And am I headed in the right direction? Tell you a little story around that. One of my heroes is Michael Jordan. I thought he was not only a great basketball player, I thought he was a real inspiration for poor kids. This will surprise you, but I'm not as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. There's a serious differential in performance. Should I feel bad about me because I'm not as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan? No. Just like mankind has a nature, each of us as a concrete human being has a nature. We're all born with certain sets of strengths and weaknesses. And all we can do is the best we can do given our nature. And interestingly enough, all that requires is you do something productive that you enjoy doing and you do it the best you can do. If you're doing something productive that you enjoy doing and you're doing it the best you can do, you're perfect. People say perfection is impossible. Well, if it's impossible, it ain't perfect, right? Perfection is the best possible, and you can be perfect and get better because it's contextual. You can learn, you can grow. If you're not doing something productive, if you're not doing something you enjoy doing something different. If you're doing something productive you enjoy doing, but you're not doing it well, do it as best you can do it. You can make two errors in self-evaluation. The first error is when you think you're better than you are. It's called arrogance. Arrogance usually reflects low self-esteem at a very deep level. Arrogance is very dangerous. One thing I've learned in the banking business, never lend money to arrogant people because arrogance tends to make people really detached from reality. However, I find in groups like this, arrogance is atypical. There can be some arrogant people here, but arrogance is atypical. What I find typical in groups like this of successful people, I suspect many people in this room do not feel as good about themselves as they objectively ought to. And why is that? It's because that when you were very young, you learned in that sandbox that you shouldn't be selfish. And you know at some at least subconscious level that you couldn't be here and you couldn't have been successful if you hadn't been selfish. And if you don't feel as good about yourself as you earn the right to, that's a shame. That's a shame. You're preventing yourself from being as happy as you should be. Final thought about self-esteem. In the real world, self-esteem primarily comes from romantic love and productive work. I'm not an expert on romantic love. It's probably a survival of species need. I will say one thing about romantic love, however. If you're looking for somebody to make you happy, if you expect your spouse to make you happy, you're guaranteed to fail because nobody else can make you happy. If you're looking for somebody to share your happiness with, you're almost certainly going to be successful. There's a lot of people that would like to share happiness. Productive work, I use productive work in the broadest context. Raising children is very hard, very productive work. Productive work is part of our nature as a human being. We survive by production. For the most of the people in this room, and I said this to all the employees of BB&T, the real significance of your work is because it is the single biggest driver of your self-esteem. You spend a huge amount of time, effort, and energy in your work. I said to all the employees of BB&T, it's real important to BB&T that you do your job well, but it's far, far, far more important to you. Might fool me about how well you do your job, might fool your boss about how well you do your job, but you'll never fool you. And if you don't do your work the best you can possibly do it, give them your level of skill, give them your level of knowledge. You can't do the impossible. But if you don't do your work the best you can possibly do it, you will lower your self-esteem. The good news, the flip of that's also true. If you do your work the best you can possibly do it, given your level of skill, given your level of knowledge, you will raise your self-esteem. And that's more important than whether you get a promotion or you get more money, because it's about who you are, who you are. One integrating story and why I think egalitarianism is so bad that relates to that story I was telling you about Michael Jordan. I'm not as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. I don't care how hard I tried, how hard you tried to help me. I cannot become as good a basketball player as Michael Jordan. It's simply not possible. You cannot make the average great. You can make the average better. That may be a very productive, very useful thing to do, but you cannot make the average great. However, you can make the great average. Egalitarians, by definition, have to be in the business of making the great average. That's what egalitarians do, because that's the only way to make everybody equal. It's very easy to make Michael Jordan as good a basketball player as me. Cut his legs off, right? We wouldn't do that, would we? I don't know. Western civilization has been pretty tough on great people. We poisoned Socrates, imprisoned Galileo, burned Joan of Arc. Now we're more sophisticated. We do it with balls and chains. 1% of the taxpayers pay 25% of the taxes, 5% of the taxpayers pay 60% of the taxes now, and 50% of the taxpayers pay no taxes. Great way to run a democracy, right? It's very interesting to reflect on the fact that great people have a disproportionate impact on the quality of life. When we put balls and chains on great people, we reduce the quality of life for the rest of us. Everybody in this room, your children, grandchildren, have a better life thanks to Thomas Edison. Edison not only invented the light bulb, he invented electrical generation, he invented the research laboratory itself. Put balls and chains on great people and lower the standard of living for all of us. What's interesting, though, is egalitarians like to claim the moral high ground. This is a huge issue in our society, because who can argue with everybody being equal? You know what I think motivates egalitarians? The most destructive of all human emotions, and watch it in yourself, it's called envy. Hatred of the good for being the good. And that's why egalitarianism is such a destructive idea. 10th value is teamwork and mutual supportiveness. In any organizational context, we want people that have strong personal goals, that think for themselves, but recognize that in an organizational context, we're in it together. And that means you have to be a good team player. And good team players have three basic attributes. First, they do their own job well. Most common reason that people fail teams is they don't do their own job well. Secondly, good team players root for the fellow teammates to be successful. There's an old saying in the South, lie down with dogs, get fleas. The flip of that's also true. Spend time with great people and get to be great. A lot of times, unfortunately, we root against our teammates, don't we? Why do we root against our teammates? That most destructive of all human emotions called envy. If you want to be successful, jealousy, envy, if you want to be successful, find people that are better than you and learn from them. Root for them, not for them, but for you. Final aspect of teamwork is that you have to think about how your work impacts the rest of the team. Simple example. We have a branch manager. That branch manager has to do her own job well, but she has to think about how her work's impacting the customer service representative, the teller. Is she filling in the expense voucher so somebody in the home office doesn't have to undo the work that she did improperly? Good team players understand how their work impacts the rest of the team. Those are our 10 core values at BB&T, and you can see if those of you that have studied objectivism, they come from the metaphysics, epistemology, and values in objectivism. They work in the real world. Some of the most powerful attributes of this system is that they are not only non-contradictory, they're integrated. Fail on one of the attributes, fail on all the others. If you're dishonest, you're disconnected from reality, you can't be rational, you can't be just, etc., etc. I would also argue they're comprehensive, and this is, I think, a very important idea. Go back to that original discussion of concept formation. The better your concepts are, the more effectively you can think. Here are 10 core concepts that can dramatically improve your thinking ability. There are many other positive attributes, but every attribute I can think of fits in this system. For example, courage is a positive attribute, but if you have integrity, you're going to have courage. Trustworthiness is a positive attribute, but if you're honest, you're trustworthy. In 10 principles, you can dramatically improve the probability of making the right ethical decisions and the probability of ultimately being successful and ultimately being happy. One of the issues you often hear about when you talk about reason is, wow, you're saying emotions don't matter, you got to repress your emotions. And I think sometimes objectivists avoid the issue of emotions. Emotions are very important. They're not going away. They're part of who you are. Emotions matter. They matter a lot. However, a lot of people misunderstand the role of emotions. A couple thoughts about emotions. Emotions, in a way, are like primitive values. They're automated responses to people, events, things that we have in our life, largely developed as children, although they evolved throughout our lives. You met somebody you liked. You met somebody like them. You said, I'm going to like that kind of person. You did something you didn't like. You did something like it and you didn't like it. You said, I'm not going to like that kind of event. We developed these automated responses. That was actually a pretty healthy exercise because you didn't have to reinvent the wheel. However, if you think about how you were developing these automated responses, largely as a child, the odds of all your emotions being helpful is very small. In fact, I don't know if I've ever met anybody that didn't have some destructive emotions. A couple thoughts about emotions. Emotions are learned. There's nothing magical or mystical or hardwired about emotions. We may have certain kind of emotional propensities, but we learn our emotions. If we didn't, we'd all have the same emotions, and I guarantee you every person in this room has a different set of emotions. Because you have learned your emotions, you can change your emotions. Changing your emotions is a very hard activity, but it's very high payback. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of introspection. A number of members of the executive management BB&T and myself have changed our emotions and dramatically improved our performance. One of the most, the clear goal in emotion change is you want to be happy when you should be happy. And you want to be unhappy when you should be unhappy. A lot of people, when they go out trying to focus on changing their emotions, try to make themselves never be unhappy. There are objective times when you should be unhappy. But the goal is to avoid the curse of successful people, which is being unhappy when you should be happy. One last thought about emotions, and I think this is actually a very important thought. Emotions are not a means of knowledge. In any conflict between reason and emotion, always pick reason. Emotions are just reasons you had when you were very young. That's very important for this group because what you're going to find is most of the time your reason and your emotions will align. When they don't, that's a red flag. And here's what the red flag says. Think about my reasons. Am I really coming at this from a logical, rational perspective? If I am, then go with my reasons, not my emotions. I tell this story on university campuses. When I was in college, I had a number of times when my brain told me to do something, my emotions still told me to do something else, and I went with my emotions. And 40 years later, I'd like to get a few of those things back. In business, when I look at the people that were CEOs of large financial institutions, many of which I knew for a long time, they were very smart, highly educated people. But if you look at what got them in trouble, I think it was two attributes. One, they evaded, and second, they were driven by emotions. And often that emotion was pretty simple. They wanted their bank to be bigger than the other guy's bank as an end in itself. So emotions are very important. They're not going away, but they're not a means of knowledge. In fact, however, you do want to be emotional in the sense of having passion and meaning in your life. If you're a purposeful person, passion goes with that. Emotional energy goes with that. So it's not that emotions are bad. Emotions, in fact, are very helpful when we manage them properly. One last thought. We strongly believe in systematized earning, that excellence at art won by training by habituation. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. I think sometimes people that understand ideas intellectually just want to put them in the top of their head. They don't want to turn them into behaviors that produce superior results. If you believe in these concepts, and you need to think about how would I act to achieve the goals I have in my life? Where am I not getting the outcomes I want? What behaviors would I have to do differently? What beliefs would cause me to sustain those behaviors? And then I would have to habituate those activities. A lot of leadership and management is about defining behaviors that produce superior results, reinforcing the beliefs that will cause people to act in that manner, and habituating those behaviors and beliefs to produce superior results. This group doesn't need this, but when I talk to mostly non-objectivist audiences, and I recommend Atlas Shrugged to those kind of audiences. One interesting thought. fortunately, BB&T has done better than almost any large financial institutions in America. And people ask me why, and certainly we had some good strategies, we have some great people, but I don't think our strategies and our people are really that much better than a lot of our competitors. I think the fundamental reason that BB&T's done better is we have a value system that we live religiously, that we adhere to our principles in the good times and the bad times, and I think that is why our organization has been successful, and I think the vast majority of the employees, and I know the board of BB&T feels exactly that way. In fact, my observation in life, some good luck happens, bad luck happens, lots of things happen in life. But I do strongly believe that the foundation for organizational success, and more important, the foundation for personal happiness, is having the right kind of principles. And I know we have principled people in this room, and I think living these principles is one of the most important ways that you can communicate a philosophy. Because people will judge you not by what you say, but by who you are. And if you have the right set of principles, and you live those principles, and that leads to your success and your happiness, you can communicate a lot by that. Thank you very much.